everyone, and welcome to another episode of Traditionally Speaking. My name is Tom, and together with my friend Joe, we'd like to wish you a very happy new year.
And a happy Christmas.
Well, in keeping with January and Burns Night over here in Scotland, we've got an unusual Christmas theme this time, and that is the Bannock cake and the Ecclefechan tart, two delicacies which have come to typify Christmas in Scotland, but not necessarily for everyone, because one of them is very ancient and the other one actually quite new.
And neither one of them are known in the United States that I'm aware of. I've never heard anybody mention either of those two things, Tom. What exactly are they?
Well, the bannock cake is a very ancient food in Scotland, and it's actually originally a flat quick bread. It's something that you would cook from grain, or probably berrymeal actually, which is a different kind of grain, which is found in Orkney, up in the Northern Islands of Scotland. And the interesting thing about the bannock is, to look at it, there's not much that seems initially festive about it. It was something that was really a staple food, but it's something that's mentioned by Robert Burns, who's Scotland's famous national poet, and something that really was baked for many centuries. I mean, at least as far back as the 8th century. But the reason why it's become associated with Christmas is because there is a festive bannock, and it's more like a cake. It's actually one of the precursors to modern Scottish shortbread. And that's one of the great Scottish delicacies, which is, it's popular at all times of the year, but it's especially popular in the new year, the Hogmanay period. And that's an amazing thing, actually, because it's had a bit of a comeback. A lot of food historians love them. And originally, the Yule bannock was made with oatmeal, but really, because sort of over the past few decades, people have come to kind of rediscover the Christmas bannock, because the Yule bannock is made with berrymeal, again, something that originates in Orkney, and it's something that's been milled in Orkney for about 300 years. So it's an ancient form of barley. So it's perfect for baking, and it's one of the key ingredients of the festive bannock cake. But the other things you will find in there are mixed peel, cherries, cinnamon, and various other spices.
So
there's
this
a
predates our fruitcake by centuries. I was going to say, you think they'll show it on the British baking show anytime soon?
Well, it would be interesting, because it's something that's kind of been rediscovered. I mean, because bannock for so long has been a traditional kind of bread. I mean, there are other kinds of bannock. There's a Selkirk bannock, for instance, which is closer to like a kind of a fruitcake. And that's quite popular. You can buy that from supermarkets and places like that. But the Yule bannock, I mean, it goes through various different iterations. There are lots of different kinds of variations of the Yule bannock. But this kind of shortbread-like consistency has made it much more popular, and it's starting now to come back into Scottish culture, even although the actual basis for it is many centuries old.
Now, I've never heard of it in the United States. I mean, maybe some of our listeners have heard of it, but you mentioned that it's even getting popular in Canada. I think you said around Nova Scotia, right?
Well, that's something else actually, and I'm glad you
Oh,
brought it up.
oh, I'm sorry. I'm jumping ahead on the other thing, aren't I?
Yeah, well, that is the Ecclefechan tart, and
And trust me, folks, he's not swearing.
no,
Okay,
no.
that's the actual name of it. It's the Ecclefechan. What is it again? Ecclefechan?
Yeah, let me promise you, if you're listening in North America, everybody in Scotland has difficulty pronouncing it as well. It's the Ecclefechan tart, and it's so called because it's produced, or was originally produced, in the beautiful Scottish town of Ecclefechan, which is right on the border between Scotland and England. Now, Ecclefechan is famous for a number of reasons. It's particularly famous because it was the birthplace of Thomas Carlyle, who was one of Scotland's great intellectuals in the Victorian age. He was a mathematician and a philosopher and an essayist. But in more recent years, it's become famous because it has two particular types of produce which have become well known. One of them is a blended Scotch whisky called the Fechan, and it originates from Ecclefechan. But probably the more famous of the two, and it's become more famous in recent years, is the Ecclefechan tart. Now, it's sold, it's a mixture of butter and dried fruits, and it's served in a pastry shell. Now, it became more popular. I mean, it's something that goes back for many years, but it's become more popular because in 2007, a very famous supermarket chain over here called Sainsbury's promoted the Ecclefechan tart, and they sold it specifically as an alternative to the traditional mince pie. So I know we're going to talk about the mince pie in a separate episode, but because it has a very long history. But the Ecclefechan tart was sold in a pack of four, and it was a huge success. And as a result of that, it's re-released every year, round about sort of November, December time, because people who don't necessarily like mince pies do enjoy the Ecclefechan tart. It's different kind of consistency.
Can I interrupt you? I'm just curious. What makes an Ecclefechan tart different from like the American fruitcake that we curse and pass around in our country every season? Is it similar? Because you mentioned fruits and different seasonings that I think you would find in most fruitcakes out here. Is that kind of like a derivative from the Ecclefechan tart, or is it something entirely different?
Well, it's slightly different because they tend to be sized the same as a mince pie, so they're quite small,
Oh, okay, and more
probably a couple
flat.
of inches,
Yeah.
in circumference. But you will tend to find they have quite a crumbly pastry shell, and the combination of dried fruits are slightly different from the sort of spiced centre that you would have in a mince pie.
Okay.
Um, so it's a slightly different variation on the mince pie, but it's become quite popular. And as you mentioned earlier, it's something that is sold in Canada. I mean, particularly places like Nova Scotia, where there is still a bit of Scottish cultural heritage. They've become quite popular there. They're actually even more popular now because a company called Walker's over here in Scotland have made a variation of the Ecclefechan tart um, available nationally. So it's much more easy to access now, and it's become quite a popular Christmas treat.
Now, uh, do you know, does anybody do this in America? Have you heard of anything like this? I sure haven't. I mean, I haven't heard of either this or the Bannock cake. And so again, it just shows how different our countries are when it comes to celebrating some of the what we consider more basic things, like a fruit cake versus an Ecclefechan tart. So, which sounds like it wouldn't make it around as much because it's too small and get eaten before.
Yeah, I mean that's a big difference because the bannock cake is something that has been around for many centuries, and it's been rediscovered in a way and almost rebranded for the modern age. But the difference between that and the Ecclefechan tart is that because it's been rediscovered essentially by big business, it's become available now much more widely than it ever was before. So from that point of view, they've both found a much broader audience than perhaps they might have had otherwise.
Now, since we're talking about traditions, is this something that you would eat at your own home, or is it something you would gift to somebody, or both, or because you say it's having a resurgence, which obviously means that it fits right into traditionally speaking and what we're talking about here. But how do is it just something that you buy for your own home, or is it something that you take to the office, or what? How do you celebrate this? I guess is what I'm asking.
Well, you tend to find in most cases with the festive bannock, it's something that you might bake at home. and many people have different recipes for it. So yeah, I mean, from that point of view, it's something that's quite popular as perhaps something you would bake as a gift for friends or family. The Ecclefechan tart, though, because they tend to be sold in packs of four, it's something that's quite popular in the lead up to Christmas. If you can take it to friends or, perhaps as you say in the workplace, there are four servings, so there's something that's good to share around.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, okay. So, and do they decorate them, or are they just pretty much sold as they're baked?
Well, I've seen some of the Yule bannocks being decorated much in the same way as you might decorate gingerbread.
Oh,
Although, as I
right.
say, in
Mhm.
terms of consistency, though, they're much closer to shortbread. And obviously, shortbread is a real New Year staple here in Scotland. Although, in actual fact, butter shortbread is actually popular all the year round. So, from that point of view, yeah, I mean, lots of people have different ways of baking it. Um, Often it will depend very much on your own individual taste. But here in Stirling, right in the centre of Scotland, it has a different kind of nuance because the Bannock Burn runs through Stirling on the way to the River Forth. And that, of course, is Gaelic for the River of Bread. So there's that ancient connection to the Bannock there as well.
Now, it sounds like the Bannock bread is something that's strictly kind of a Scottish tradition, or does it take place, do people bake it in other parts of Europe or other countries that you know of? And same thing with the Ecclefechan, which I still can't say, Ecclefechan tart. Being on the border of Scotland and England, do both countries celebrate that, or what's kind of the distribution on this?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because I mean, because the bannock originates as a kind of quick bread, there are lots of different variations of it, and you can see that in lots of different places. I mean, there's a Scandinavian influence. There are influences in other parts of mainland Europe, but every country brings its own take on the tradition, if you like.
Hmm.
The Ecclefechan tart is quite interesting because where it is, as you say, right on the borderland, um, there's lots of different variations, and you tend to find actually that's one of the really amazing things in Scotland and England. When it comes to food history, lots of different towns have their own traditions. There are things like the Kendal mint cake, things like that down in England, which are really well respected and enjoyed by many people. So the Ecclefechan tart is really part of that broader tradition of a town or a village having a speciality food.
Wow, I mean, that's really fascinating. And again, not familiar with it in this country and haven't heard about it in other countries as well, except for what you've told us. And that's just fascinating that you would have something so totally unknown for this area, because we love stealing all kinds of recipes from all kinds of countries. So I mean, you mentioned the mincemeat, and of course their gingerbread, but
Mhm.
those obviously were not American born, those came from a different country. And and it's amazing that we haven't adopted this recipe, because it sounds delicious. I'd love to try it sometime. So you're going to send me something for Christmas?
Well, why not? I'll tell you, because it's one of those things that are really distinctive. I think you would know right away whether it was going to become a favourite or not. Lots and lots of people love the Ecclefechan tart because it's just so different and yet strangely similar to the mince pie. It's the kind of thing you can have as a little pre-Christmas treat. But you tend to find people will favour one or the other.
Well, and I'll tell you, I'd love to try it, and just to compare it to some of the holiday treats that we have out here. Of course, we've already discussed Christmas cookies at length, but again, it's like there's a lot of different recipes and different things that you do completely separate from the US. So, but I'd love to try it sometime. And unlike Christmas crackers, you would have no trouble shipping it because there's nothing explosive in it. So
Yeah, absolutely.
at least I don't think there is there, Tom?
Not that I'm aware of. Not based on the ingredients I've seen, no.
Maybe later, but not initially. That's funny. So again, it's pronounced Ecclefechan.
That's right. That's right. And it's
Oh,
one of the more famous Scottish contributions to festive cuisine. Although there is another equally celebrated food, and that is the clootie dumpling. But I
excuse
think we
me,
need a whole yeah, the clootie dumpling.
quickie dumpling. Okay,
No, clootie dumpling.
quickie.
It's a dumpling that's prepared in a clute, which is a kind of like a cloth. I think we may need a separate episode for that one though, because there's a whole story behind the clootie dumpling and how it came about.
Well, folks, if you aren't getting the fact that we're going to be continuing this podcast forever just based on some of the recipes from both our countries, you're not catching on quick enough. Now, let me ask you a question. Do you have a recipe for either of these items or both of them?
I have a recipe for the festive bannock. I don't have a recipe for the Ecclefechan tart because it's quite a closely guarded secret in some corners. Everybody has their own way of doing it. I think it's one of those closely guarded mysteries as to what the original Ecclefechan tart contains. One has to assume that some of these companies must know because it's with every year it seems to be growing in popularity.
Well, maybe one of our Scottish listeners would be so kind as to submit a recipe for the Ecclefechan tart. And in the meantime, Tom's going to actually put up the recipe for the Bannock bread on our website, traditionallyspeaking.com. Right, Tom?
Yes, absolutely.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah, and let's face it, it's going to be one of those things that people are either going to love or perhaps not love so much, but there's only one way to find out.
Well, and it would, again, it'd be fun for us in the US to take a look at this and try it and see if we like it. It may become a tradition in the United States someday, and maybe one of our listeners will start the whole thing off. So it would be fun to try some of these new recipes and to see how they come out and how they're accepted in this country versus Scotland. So by all means, let's make sure we get that put up. And again, the website is www.traditionally-speaking.com. And if you go online, you can find the recipe and give it a whirl in your own kitchen.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do hope you enjoy it because generations of Scots have debated on the merits of the bannock cake and indeed the Ecclefechan tart throughout the generations. So now you can put your own stamp on that debate and see what you think.
And again, I urge our listeners that would be willing to share their Ecclefechan tart recipe to send it to us, and we'll post it and let some of these Americans try, something that's known and loved in Scotland.
I mean, we'd love to hear what you think.
Well, I'll tell you, this has been interesting. And as you already heard from Tom, he's already alluded to the fact that we've got several other interesting dishes that are either known or unknown to both our countries. And we're going to be discussing more of these. There's other traditions that are taking place that a lot of people don't even know about. So I hope you're going to enjoy listening to those as well. So, but in the meantime, and those who want to try the bannock bread recipe, let us know what you think. If you've tried the recipe and you like it and say, yeah, I don't know why this didn't take off, but I'm going to, pass it around. Let us know. We'd love to hear this.
Yeah, I mean, it's sometimes nice, isn't it, to look back through the generations and find something that, perhaps hasn't been tried for a while, those old favourites. see how they shape up in the modern world.
Well, that was the whole purpose between you and I doing this podcast, traditionally speaking, is because there have been a lot of great traditions that either were lost or just never quite made it across the pond from one country to the other. And it's kind of neat to kind of introduce some of these things to a whole new audience.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think food history is such a fascinating subject anyway, because it always shines an interesting light on, different cultures at different points in history. But that's the amazing thing, isn't it? Because you can try these things for yourself and see what your own view is.
Uh-oh, I think Tom's thinking of another podcast. We may be putting out a food podcast pretty soon, so just based on different recipes between our two countries. So I'd have a real problem with that, wouldn't I?
Well, it just wouldn't be Christmas without good food now, would it?
Oh, I think that's why Christmas is one of the reasons it's so popular. And if you think this is good, we've got really some wonderful podcasts coming up on other traditions, and including something that's near and dear to my heart in our next podcast. So please stay tuned and please be listening for our next podcast that comes out on the 15th of each month.
Thanks very much for joining us, folks. If you're celebrating Burns Night this January to celebrate the life of Scotland's national bard, then I wish you every success in it. And we'll certainly be lifting a glass of whiskey to toast your good health.
And I'll even join you on that one. So, okay, folks. Well, thanks again for tuning in. And I hope you found this fascinating and fun. I know I did. We could just go around practicing Ecclefechan and say that to somebody you're angry at, and I'm sure they'll think you're swearing at them.
Thanks, everyone, for joining us today. I hope that you'll tune in again soon.
Take care. Bye-bye.